Welcome to another episode of Tech Beyond Gender. I'm your host, Meena Satish Kumar. Our guest today is Sneha Rao from Microsoft Australia. She's a partner lead and has been in tech sector for more than 20 years. Thank you for joining us today, Sneha. We are looking forward to our conversation.
My pleasure. Absolutely my pleasure. Thank you, Meena, for having me.
Cool. Sneha, I don't really know much about your background, what sparked your interest, or what triggered your career in technology. I'd like to know more about you. Why don't you start from the early days of your career or even from your education, if you're comfortable sharing?
I grew up in India, and my dad was invited by the Australian National University to actually come across and help start one of the departments, which is what sparked my migration journey to Australia. I came here as a student with my father, and did E11 and onwards. And to be very honest, my interest in IT was very accidental. In fact, almost my brother did engineering. He's older than me, 3 years older than me, and I went, I might as well do the same. There was really no intentional desire to be in tech, other than, can I get a job in tech? Yep. Can I be independent in tech? Yep. And it was one of the up and coming fields when I was doing it. I think I started my degree in 1997, 98, and I was one of the very few software engineers, female software engineers in my degree. Although I must say, I did a combined degree. I was always hesitant as to whether I would actually have a career in tech. So I did a combined degree between economics, and my father is an economist, and software engineering. My preferred field would have been psychiatry. I actually had enrolled into psychiatry and was convinced by my parents to move away from it, thinking that there will be no jobs. I guess they didn't really know what the future held. That's how I kind of fell into tech. And I went, well, if I can't do psychiatry, I'd do economics and software engineering. And I was one of the only females I know who did a combined degree between economics and software engineering. Both were very tough. ANU was one of the best universities for economics as well. So I saw a lot of people drop out. Funnily enough, I remember going into my first economics lecture, and my lecturer there said, look to your right, look to your left, and only one of you is going to move to the next year. So the dropout rates in economics for students was a lot higher than, let's say, software engineering. But yeah, that's really my journey. Early in my career, I started my career with Accenture, and then again, one of the very few females to get into tech in Accenture, and then moved into some of the big names like IBM, and then went into a startup, and finally a Microsoft partner firm, followed by Microsoft. And I've been at Microsoft for the last 10 years. So I often find myself as one of the only females in a room of males when I'm doing executive roundtables. So it is quite daunting, but it's definitely been rewarding for the last few years that I've been in tech.
Cool. With the graduation of both economics and technology, what actually triggered you to pursue technology, not economics?
It was a very simple decision. If you want to pursue a career in economics, at least when I was doing it, you need to actually have a postgraduate degree. You needed to do a master's, you need to do a PhD. And the reality was, although I loved economics and I was a very high scoring student in economics, I didn't know what within economics was something that I was passionate about in order for me to pursue a PhD in economics. So the decision was really clear for me to get a progress in the corporate world. It needed to be information technology. Economics would have been more around government policy making and so on and so forth. And for that, I actually needed to study for at least another 6 years. in order to get any sort of credible positions there. And I didn't have a topic that I was passionate about to go, I will pursue that in economics specifically. That was pretty clear. But I do recommend anybody doing any sort of corporate work to actually do the first year of economics, because I think you become a much more balanced and rounded technologist if you understand the world of business. And there is no way you can understand the world of business without actually understanding economics. That's fundamental to any business as such.
Wow, actually, it's a very different perspective.
Yeah, I mean, just to understand what impact exchange rates have to your economy, what impact interest rates have, why does the Reserve Bank want to increase interest rate, what inflationary impacts inflation has impact on business. I think these are all, like, a business operates in the context of macroeconomics. And if you don't understand that, you don't understand the sort of pressures you get. You don't understand why capex matters over opex, or opex matters over capex in the economy that we're in. How the last 3 years, especially since COVID, have shaped the economy. I think it's really important to be able to appreciate the economic context in which our customers operate. Is really important in order to be empathetic towards the situations they're in. And also understand, I'm not kind of saying predict, you can kind of predict as well, but I understand what the future holds in terms of, am I going to see a downturn in the economy and therefore the job market and so on and so forth. I think you play a very reactionary role if you don't have a fundamental knowledge of economics. I would suggest anyone doing any sort of engineering or in the corporate world does the fundamental economics. And it's not just me. If you end up doing an MBA, economics is cool. You've got to do one subject of economics. So it is quite core to the functioning of the corporate world.
Cool. So when you mentioned about your graduation, you also mentioned that you were one among the few software engineers, right?
Yeah.
So how was it like in university scene? Like the reason I'm asking you this question is, let me provide you a bit of a context. Last year, I was having a conversation with a recent graduate who was working in a highly technical engineering space, working on building home appliances and stuff for an organization. And she was telling me how she's the only technical female working in that space. And also, even when she was in university, she felt that she had more male students around her, and when it came to any project, the male students would do all the technical pieces of work, whereas the female students were assigned more admin tasks to do. Is that something that you experienced when you were at uni?
Actually, no. In fact, to me, look, my parents went back when I was in uni. They went back to India, so I was an only student. Also, I was a student without parents over here looking out for myself. I was very intentional about my reason to be at university and what I needed to do. I was top 10% of the ANU, which is a prestigious club that you get invited in to join, which is Golden Key, when you are the top 10%. I became a tutor in university to teach database systems because I wanted to earn money while not straying too far away from my studies as well. So, I mean, I had the option of going and, working at McDonald's or Subway or whatever, but I chose to do it within my field, even at a young age. I started my internship with Accenture when I was in my second year of university. They used to only give it to penultimate year students, and I remember having this conversation with my brother. My brother and I both, he was 1 year senior to me in university. He was in his penultimate year. I was finishing off my second year of a 4-year degree. Both of us applied for an internship job. and both of us were interviewing, but I got the job and he didn't. And he was like, well, you're not even qualified. You didn't even meet their requirements and you got the job. And I went, yeah, it tells you that I probably performed better at an interview in terms of being able to articulate myself. So maybe something you need to work on there. But the challenge I had, though, even from my own brother, was, oh no, it's because you got the skirt concession. Because even then, at that time, diversity and female representation in technology fields was quite demanded, and there weren't as many of us. Let's just put it that way. So I didn't actually have, funnily enough, an issue there in terms of the type of work I did, because I got put on a defense project and I was coding and we were working on a release, and so I was actually doing proper work and not administrative work. But I had to battle. I had to battle perception around whether I got the job because I wore a skirt, or whether I got the job because I actually truly was qualified to get the job. At that point in time, I think that perception and the acknowledgement that I got the job based on my merit and not based on my gender was always something that I had a battle on. So yeah, I mean, that's my take. I don't think I've ever gotten into a job where I've had to do administrative work just because I'm a female, and my male counterparts received more rewarding work. Absolutely not.
Have you experienced that skirt concession concept in your career otherwise, where you've heard whispers saying that, okay, you probably got this promotion or you got this particular role because you're female?
Subconsciously, yes, a lot of the times. I've had to question myself whether I really did deserve the job, or did I get it because I was the diversity candidate. Not so much at Microsoft. I think Microsoft is pretty well balanced in terms of giving the job to the person who deserves it. But I do feel that as I have gotten further up in my career, I definitely I don't know whether this is the right way of saying it, but I feel that my achievements have been overlooked rather than being amplified, to be very honest. I feel I have to work a lot harder to prove my merit compared to some of my other counterparts. And I don't know whether it is the multidimensional layer of my diversity that comes into play, because I have a brand, and this is not me saying it. I have taken a brand survey with the people I've worked with, both externally and internally at Microsoft as well, saying, like, if you were to describe me, what would be the words that you would use? And essentially, the words tend to be, if you want to get the job done, give it to Sneha. So the type of brand I seem to have maintained over time is that of getting the job done, committed, but a doer, not a leader. And that's where I feel that there needs to be, whether there is a bias there or a perception that needs to really be worked on separately. So I know I haven't really answered your question as to whether I have been plagued by the skirt concession bias, but I think I've been in a positive manner. I do believe I've been plagued by other biases, negatively rather than positively, that have hindered my career progression more than anything else.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, if you do see, right, in the tech sector, especially when in the technical roles, you do see very less women represented in senior technical roles, and even so in leadership too. In that case, do you think skirt concession is a good concept to have? Do they need to make more provision for females to enter into the sector, to retain more female employees in tech sector?
So I don't think Nina, to be very honest, between you and me, would you like to get a job because you were a female?
No, preferably not, because I might get
Correct.
into the job and actually have imposter syndrome. Like I might question myself whether I'm actually eligible or like skilled to perform a specific role. Yeah.
Correct. Correct. So I think having a skirt concession or a quota is always bad in that sense. Just getting the job just because I was a female, I would like to do it. Because not only me questioning my own confidence and self-confidence, others would question my ability to deliver. So I would always be plagued by someone questioning my ability, even if I didn't, because of the perception that I got the job because of my gender. So I would never encourage a quota system in terms of in terms of getting a job. I think the right person should get the job, as simple as that. What I would like to see, to be very honest, is hiring without bias. So having a blind resume where you don't disclose the gender, the name, the origin, the ethnicity, where they got educated. All you need is in your resume, your experience. You don't even need to say where that experience was. So you can say a multinational firm or a global SI, whatever. But you don't have to say it was in India or China, because what that does then is introduce a bias for people. So I don't think a quota system works, because I think that leaves the person who is applying for a job always in doubt of whether they deserve the job or not, and also leaves people questioning their potential. What I think really needs to work is eliminating or reducing the amount of bias during hiring. So when you can have a very, very experienced person who's been educated in India or China, but as soon as you put where the education was done, people come with the bias of this person's going to have an accent, they may not be good English speakers, and will take away from what they've actually achieved or their qualifications as such and their performance. So I think that needs to be removed from resume. Age needs to be removed. My birth date is of no consequence to you in terms of my ability to deliver. Because then what age does is introduce other bias. If I disclose my age and I'm in my late 20s, the immediate bias from a hiring manager's perspective is going to be late 20s, she's probably already married or looking to get married, or maybe looking to have children. And that introduces another bias. Gender, again, introduces bias. Whether we like it or not, it introduces a bias of the person. If it's a female gender, maybe a nurturer, carer, may not be able to put in as many hours. Ethnicity introduces a bias, whether they are an English speaker or not, especially in the Western world. So I think that needs to happen. Eliminating bias or reducing the amount of bias needs to come through, because the reality is, I think this is a McKinsey's report. At an entry level, to be honest, we see 33% men. If you look at 100%, 33% men enter the corporate world, 28% women enter the corporate world, 19% women of color, and 18% men of color. Now, based on industry, this might change, or tech industry, it might change, but I've just used the McKinsey standard corporate pipeline on race, ethnicity, and gender. As we get to manager, you see 41% of white men make it. So 33% to 41%. So there's been already an increase of funnel like this. White women, there hasn't been much of a drop. It's about 27%. When women of color drop down to 13% from 19%, and men of color stay the same at 18%. Now, if you look at senior manager director position, you look at white men again increase, the funnels going this way. They go from 41 to 46. White women stay stable at about 28%. Women of color drop another 3 points to 10%. And then men of color drop to 15%. And now we look at senior vice president position. You look at white women about 26%. So they drop by about 2 percentage points. White men about 52%. They go up again. And women of color, people like you and me, drop down to 8%. And at C-suite, they go to 6%. So there is clearly a bias, not just for women, but there is the intersectionality plays a higher role in the bias. Because when you look at it, White women, when they join, they're about 28%, and at C-suite, they're 22%. So they do drop, but they drop by 6 percentage points. Women of color start at 19%, and they drop down to 6%.
So this is where I feel the quota system can play a role. Once again, it's a fine balance, right? Because how are you going to have more women in the leadership roles to enable decision making if we are not going to give enough opportunities? Because, for instance, I'm just saying one of the someone with whom I was having a conversation with earlier on. She's an aspiring CIO, and she's been looking through job ads to see, okay, what is the criteria that they look for? What eligibility criteria is required for me to apply for a specific role? She said in order to apply for certain leadership roles, they explicitly say you need to have 10 years of experience, 10 plus years of experience in the tech sector in some form of leadership roles. And like 10 years back too, obviously the gender bias existed even then. So obviously there won't be many women applying for these roles because they don't have that 10 plus years of experience in those roles, what they're looking for. So in that case, how do we actually make provision for women to come up into those leadership roles, or even in certain roles where it's male dominant? It's only when you have more women at the table, they can influence those decisions, right?
So I think yes and no. Quota system may work, but it may not work with 100%. Okay. So the way I see it, quota system gives you a destination to get to. It gives you a goal. I think the first thing that needs to happen, and most organizations don't do this because most government don't require you to do this, is measure. First of all, measure what is your diversity balance across the organization. Are you measuring race? Are you measuring gender? At the moment, most organizations only measure potentially indigenous and non-indigenous. They probably measure that, and they probably measure disability, because every company has to pay a fine if they don't meet a disability quota. That's like globally, corporates pay massive amounts of fines every year in order to because they're not able to fulfill their disability quota as such, right? So even though they've been given a quota, they're not able to fulfill it. What I think needs to work is systemic changes that we need to put in place across the board in order to promote talent that is diverse. Okay, so for that, number one, unbiased hiring. That needs to be the first step. We need to be able to hire in a way that reduces or eliminates. Can never eliminate bias, but reduces bias. The second thing we need to do is put programs in place, because there is a difference between capability and capacity. We may have a lot of people, a lot of women in the workflows, but how many of them are capable of leading? That's really, really important. So you need to distinguish, how do you bring their capability up? Because if you can't just put a number to say we want to have these many women leaders. You got to create systems in place to go, how do we bring the capability up of all of these women who may take a break for having children, who may take a break for multiple different reasons. They may be carers at home because they're taking care of their aged parents, whatever might be the reason. But how do we bring their capability up and recognize them and put programs in place to lift them, and role modeling? Do we have enough female role models in place? Because I cannot be what I cannot see. So even within my organization, I don't have any or many Asian women leaders whom I can go to and go, what did you do? How did you get to where you got to? Or even at an industry level, Meena, how many of us have Asian women leaders who go, will you mentor me? Will you guide me how you went there? I also think industry-wise, we need to change some parameters. We have awards for young achievers under 40. okay, for females. We female achievers under 40. 40? I just sit there going, the amount of pressure put on females to do things under the age of 40 is significant. And males don't have that pressure. But if we go biologically, like our biological clock is in complete contradiction to our official, like our career clock. Biologically, we're meant to be married and have children before we are 40. But we're also meant to achieve everything from a work perspective under 40 to be recognized as a young talent. And I just sit there and go, that doesn't work. And it doesn't work because if I've had 2 children, I've had to take 2 years off. And I probably have had to go part-time or reduced hours so I can be a mother at the same time as be a professional. And so I can't do the 12-hour days a male is doing because I actually have a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old waiting at home for me. And I've got to balance that. So I am probably, for every child that I choose to have, I'm probably about 3 years behind in my career than my male counterpart. And I go, well, then I obviously will not achieve stuff under 40. And on top of that, if I'm a migrant, I've had to come and requalify and redo my degree and reestablish myself over here from scratch, unlike someone who's done their degree over here. So if I'm a migrant female who's decided to have children, I'm never going to get there. Like, yes, age-wise, I'm under 40, great. But my ability to have demonstrated that experience in the context of the place that I am in is being reduced significantly by about 8 to 10 years. So we've got to measure appropriately. So I think systems need to change and our measures need to change. Quota alone is not going to drive the impact. What quota alone will do is, because you'll have to put a quota of, we need to have 40% representation in boards for women. Yes, you're going to get there, but there will be majority white women. There won't be women. And we got to go, how do you create a diverse women quota, especially in countries like New Zealand and Australia, where 51% of the people in Australia have had one parent born overseas. 17% of the migration comes from a country like India. So you've got to have like a clear-cut 40% have to be women. Doesn't work because you'll meet the number, but would it be women in the context of how we see women in the demographic of Australia and New Zealand? Probably not.
Yes, I agree to that. Yeah. You also mentioned, like, as a woman, you had to actually work extra hard compared to your other colleagues. Now, do you think ethnicity played a role along with a layer of gender?
I definitely think so. I think, and data is there to prove it. As I just said, the McKinsey report shows that. I think women, forget women, I think people from a colored background of any sort, whether it's Chinese, Indians, we have a bias associated with this. It's a good bias, but the bias is that we get the job done, we grind and grind and grind, and we work really hard, and we do whatever is needed to do to get it done. The challenge we have is we are not recognized as leaders. We are not recognized as people who can drive people with us or take people with us. We're recognized as those who follow the pack and get the job done. So we are at best, people who are part of a team that drives success, not necessarily a leader that drives a team to success. And that is complete bias. And in fact, I've had people in the corporate world, I won't say which company, but hiring managers from a corporate world come and tell me directly, we don't want Asians as managers. To my face. I've had someone tell me directly, do you really think Asian women want to be in leadership positions? Because we thought Asian culture was all about nurturing and family oriented. So maybe, they'd like to be, do the job and go back home to their families. Obviously, my rebuttal was, isn't this the same perception that men had of women 50 years ago? And we've just around our clock 50 years and just put Asian in front of women and using the same biases, because women in general are nurturers and carers. Just now, by saying adding Asian in front of a woman, you've just killed my ambitions because with your biases. Because I'm not working 16 hours to get paid to work for 8 hours. I'm working 16 hours a day in order to ensure that I can get ahead in my career. And I want to see that opportunity come through to me. So I definitely believe there are biases. We plague from the bias of being a doer and not a leader. And I think we need to somehow change that. And I don't know whether it is us who change that or whether the systems in place need to recognize that to change that. Absolutely. We also need to differentiate between just because we can get the job done and we can get the job done well doesn't mean that we have the capability to be a leader. The capabilities to be a leader, to being a leader, are very different to being a doer. So we need to ensure that how do we come out of that doer attitude and become a leader attitude, and how an organization creates those the ecosystem that helps define that and recognize that and promotes that and create a program around that is really important as well.
What you said has actually triggered a couple of questions for me. One was around, in corporate world, we are perceived in a specific way where people perceive that we are not ready for a leadership role, right? Do you think those biases also exist within our families with the cultural conditioning as well? Because I'm from India as well as you are. And do you think the cultural conditioning within the families can also have an impact on women, where women themselves can undermine their skill sets and say, okay, I'll just follow the group rather than take a leadership role, because that could be the way they are conditioned to operate?
Look, I think culture plays a significant role, and fortunately or unfortunately, as rich as the culture is, the Asian culture is, it's not one culture; it's multiple cultures. As such, I think women put a lot of pressure. I think Asian women put a lot of pressure on themselves. I think we hesitate to delegate at home because of the cultural pressures put on us and the perceptions of our own families. I think we need to learn to push back or ignore a lot more. Look, I'll use the example of my own family. My mom used to work. She used to work in a bank. My dad used to work as well. Both of them worked, but both of them equally took care of us. My mom's banking hours meant that she worked on the weekend. So my dad looked after us on the weekend, including cooking. Was I one of the few Indian families where that happened? Absolutely. But now, if you think about it, whenever there is something at home, my mom expects me to have fulfilled that. She goes, why don't you make this? Why don't you do this for the kids? And I go, hang on, rewind back to 20 years ago, 30 years ago when you used to work, Mom. Imagine how much Dad used to help you. So I think our parents put in with the best of intentions, because they are looking for our grandchildren to have a best, well-rounded upbringing. They put pressure on us, unnecessary pressure on us. I think we culturally put unnecessary pressure on us as well. I think we need to understand, in order to have it all, there's certain things we need to outsource, there's certain things we need to delegate, and there's certain things we do ourselves. Mm-hmm. And there's one thing, I think my husband said this, and I totally agree with it. We need to get used to, I think Asian women are perfectionists. We need to get used to a particular mindset. My husband says this: if you want to get it done, I will do it. If you want to get it done your way, then you've got to do it. But be happy with the way it's get. If you, for example, when I have to work late, I can just wake up at 4 a.m., cook dinner because I want my children to have a good meal and leave home. Do 2 hours of cooking or whatever and then leave home so I can come back late. Or I can tell my husband, organize dinner. The intention is the kids get fed. I don't care what it is. And I've got to change my mindset there. So that day, it might be pizza. It might be unhealthy. It might be takeout because my husband isn't the best cook in the world to be able to cook the food. But it got done. They got fed. They didn't go to bed hungry. And I got to be happy with the way it got done. But if I want them to have a well-balanced meal, well, I guess I've got to take time out to get it done. So I think it's really important to understand the distinction between, are you going to be happy with it being done? Or are you going to be upset with it being done because it wasn't done your way? And if it's got to be done your way, you've got to do it. Mm. And that pressure, we've got to be okay with it. So culturally, I think we have a lot of pressure on us, and we've got to learn to push back. And sometimes pushback doesn't mean, there is my father says this: you've been given 2 years and a passageway in between. Okay, you got to learn what goes in one ear, out the other. What goes in one ear, stored in the passageway for you to use later on, so that you decide what is important to you. Because if you start taking to heart every single thing people say, and people will talk, unfortunately, even though we've been given 2 ears, one mouth to be used in that proportion, we always use it in an inverse proportion. We talk a lot more than we listen. So people will talk. It's up to you what you keep inside as information and I guess knowledge for you to use later on, and what you just let go as a tunnel. So and unfortunately, Asian cultures have a lot more of that than Western culture, because we have, and I would say, I think even Greek culture and Italian culture is plagued with it, to be very honest, because we have much close-knit family values, much more close-knit family values. A lot of us are still in a joint family system. Like I stay with my father-in-law, for example. My father-in-law stays with us, for example. And there's a constant, like, I mean, you will not believe it. For everything, there's a constant. But it's up to me how much of it I let bother and how much of it I don't, right? So I think your own emotional strength is really important over there, and you've got to decide what's important for you. I've got to, and it's not limited to my father-in-law or my in-laws or my parents, my children. My daughters don't stop giving me guilty conscience for the time that I've missed an assembly where they got a merit award, or I've missed an event in the school, and I keep reminding them, you are girls, you will be mothers one day. Hopefully you will be working mothers one day. You will have to balance. And you've got to decide how much guilt. Imagine the amount of guilt you're giving me now. That's going to come back twofold, because you will be at these crossroads at some point in time, and you will have a conversation. You will have something at work, priorities at work, and you have priorities at home. And it's always I won't say a balancing act, because you can never get it right, but it's always a juggling act. And you got to go which one's going to fall today, and which one are you okay with falling today, because you're not going to be a master juggler all the time. And you've got to be okay with it, because you are living your life. Your parents live their life. They're done with it. You've got to be okay with the life you're living.
Cool. So, like what you just highlighted is the issues that women of color normally face, right? So it's not just the biases that they have in the society that they need to deal with, but also the cultural conditioning and things that they grew up with. You were in a way lucky that you actually, while you were growing up, you saw your mom having a career of her own and dad taking up certain roles and responsibilities. Whereas someone like me, where I've just seen my mom as a homemaker and my dad doing certain tasks, and there was this clear roles differentiated, and there was this constant conditioning that as a woman, you do need to be married by this age, you need to have kids by this age. And so the emphasis was not too much on the career side of things as such. And many women do face that, and especially when they move to a country like Australia, New Zealand, or America, or wherever, they are actually, I feel that they carry some of those. There's a process of unlearning and letting go of certain things, cultural conditioning from the past, which won't help them in any way now. And also being able to fit into the culture and also seeing how they can establish themselves in their career. It's just a huge task, right?
Yep. Yep, so, absolutely.
Yeah. So how do you think this sort of cultural conditioning can also have an impact on how we display confidence, for instance, in an interview? Right? Have you thought about it?
Look, as much as my family was very, like, my mom's first piece of advice to me was never ever give up your job. Even after I had my child, financial independence is really important. Don't have joint bank accounts with your husband. Like, my mom was very modern in that sense, and gave me quite a bit of advice that allowed me to be financially independent. My dad is very similar. The one thing I do have to say, though, is that it is really important to have a partner that gives you that encouragement, that gives you that confidence, because going hindsight, I migrated to this country when I was in my teenage years. I would definitely recommend no parent doing that to their children. Because now the world is a lot smaller with Instagram and social media. Cultures have mixed. There's been influence a lot of Western culture in some of the East Asian Oriental cultures. So there is that. But when I came from a family that had no exposure to Western culture whatsoever, and I was bullied like no tomorrow in school, because of my dress sense, my style. My lack of Westernization. I mean, imagine somebody who had exposure to no Western culture coming straight from India. Everything about me was very different. I was bullied. My confidence hit rock bottom, even though I had a very supportive family. So confidence can come from various elements, I should say. Even today, I feel some of my confidence when I walk into a room full of Anglo-Saxon race. I tend to, sit back and think about what I've got to say, question myself twice as to whether I have some points of merit or not. So, and that comes from my teenage years, where my confidence did hit rock bottom. I didn't think I was good enough, right? Because those years shape you significantly. But I think in order to build your confidence up, I think you need to have a very supportive partner. If your environment at home is really supportive, and you come back home and are able to talk to your partner about both the ups and downs, more so the downs, and you get a boost of confidence from it, as opposed to not even an acknowledgement, that hurts, right? So I always say build an ecosystem of people around you, and it doesn't need to be more than one or two, to be honest, but build an ecosystem of people around you where you can go and cry, and they will give you a shoulder or even cry with you, but also then slap you and go, can you change it? No. Are you done crying? No. What are you going to do differently? How are we going to change the situation so you show up differently? So you have to have people around you who build your confidence, because that foundation has to be rock solid. If your foundation of confidence, which is people around you, is like a swamp, it'll always be very shaky, and there will be no stability around it. So, and when I say supportive partner, doesn't mean that. Look, I'll give you an example. I've had friends who wanted to go overseas for their career progression. They wanted to apply for a job overseas. And the idea of a supportive partner was, my partner said, sure, go ahead. You can go and do whatever. I won't come with you. That's not a supportive partner. Because going back 20 years, if the partner had decided to go and work overseas, it was almost expected that the wife would just join. So I think that needs to change. Being supportive doesn't mean that your partners have to understand that, you as a unit have to understand what that supportive partner is. But your confidence is really built by people either hammering it down or bringing it back up. So you've got to have people around you who constantly bring your confidence up, and you have a voice of reason with you that you can talk to.
Yeah, recently I've had experiences of listening to a few stories of women who've been bullied at work, women of color. And that really affected their level of self-confidence. In one case, this person really had a mental breakdown and just hasn't been able to get back into her career at all. And there is this other person who's also thought about possibly leaving a career in tech. And these are like single women who have just been totally shattered. The confidence level being shattered, right? So it reminded me of what you mentioned a bit earlier about how you were bullied at school. And now you're a confident woman here working in Microsoft as a partner lead. Now, what strategies really helped you build the confidence after being bullied so much?
I think it's continuously working on yourself. Although I was bullied at school, as I said, I was top 10% of university. So knowing that I was good at what I was doing and getting the marks, it was easy. Being a little bit more vulnerable, I was actually bullied at work. And this was not long ago, to the point where I was asked to leave with 2 months of pay. And I actually got therapy. I had anxiety attacks. Every time I was talking to the person I was bullied by, my watch used to tell me, what's your stress level? Because my stress levels went up the roof. I used to question even how I would write an email, and I used to get a colleague to review my email before I could send it out to anybody. So imagine the amount of overhead I had to do. And this is not long ago. This is not long ago at all. And I wasn't single. I was a married woman. And at that point in time, my confidence was so low that I didn't even share this with anybody, because I thought to share it with my parents would mean that I would stress them out. They're overseas, and I didn't want them to worry. To share it with my partner didn't really need the stress either, and the worry. I had young children. I didn't need to take it out of them. So I was just kind of burdening myself with all of the pressures that it involves. And I ended up taking, getting therapy. The only way that I felt that I could get out of it was get out of that situation. And that meant that I had to get away from the person who was doing this to me. Well, actually, there were two tactics I had. The first tactic was, I need to prove the person who was doing this to me wrong. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to work extra hard, work extra long, do extra things. But I couldn't change their mind. They were set. So my recommendation to anybody whom you're being bullied by is, don't do it. Because the bully has already made up their mind. There's nothing you can do to change their mind. So my learning from that and my advice to anybody is get away from that situation. And this is not a fight or flight situation. Sometimes you just can't fight them because you cannot change their mind. If they're hell bent on making sure that they're going to destroy you, they will destroy you. So my learning and my advice is flight in those situations. Find a different team to work in, go to a different job, because it's not you, it's them. Understand that. Because for the last 20 years, if you've been working and you've been a top achiever, and you've been now being told that you're not, and you're being bullied, it cannot be you. It's either them or the job, especially if you've gone into a new job and maybe that job is not for you, or maybe the combination. So you need to move away. So honestly, my advice would always be find a different job. If in the same organization, great. If it's not in the same organization, go to a different organization. There is no point, absolutely no point, fighting the situation. You are just going to get more and more exhausted, more and more stressed, and in stress, you will perform worse than you would if you're not stressed. So your confidence is already low, you're now stressed, your performance will suffer. So my recommendation will always be to, and look, I tried to look for other jobs and tried to apply, but unfortunately it was at a time where there was an economic downturn. So there was not much of an opportunity for me to get a job elsewhere. And I wasn't left with much of a choice with 2 young children. But yeah, so I was fighting, and that was absolutely the wrong decision to make.
Wow. Yeah. And like often, this reminds me of a saying, right? If you can't row a boat, there's no point in changing the boat. You need to know how to row the boat. So I often used to think about this, like whenever I have some challenging situations, I often think, okay, will quitting really help? Like maybe temporarily, but what if I face the same situation again in a different organization?
I think you've got to, Meena, I think you've got to identify whether it's the person or whether it is a job. Because if it's the job and if it's the skills, then you can learn the skills and you can do something about changing it. So that's the analogy of you need to learn to row the boat. But if the boat itself has a hole in it, no matter how much you learn to row the boat, you are going to sink. So you've got to understand whether it's the boat that's faulty or whether it's your skills. Sometimes it's the boat, and in that case, you've got to change the boat. So sometimes it's the person, and you've got to quit and move on. So I think the ability to understand whether it is the person or the skill is really important. And once you know that it's the person, it's time to change the person, change the situation. Right?
So cool. Yeah. So, and also going back to what you mentioned some time ago about the qualities of a doer being different to the qualities of a leader.
Yeah.
Right? So how do you clearly demark, okay, what qualities do I have? Like how can someone sit back and reflect and say, okay, these are the qualities that I have, which means that I could be a great leader and this is something I could seriously consider?
I think every profession is different, every organization is different that they see in terms of what they need from a leader. But in general, I think you've got to have the ability to move people with you as a leader. Do people gravitate towards you and ask you for advice and mentoring? And do you have the ability to get them to do things for you when you actually don't have any sort of authoritative power on them? And does that reflect to upper management? I think that's really important, because you reflecting it down is great. You do the work, but in order to be recognized to be a leader, it needs to be reflected. The upper management need to recognize that and then lift you up. Do you do you roll your sleeves up and get it done, or do you delegate to ensure that it gets done? You need to have a mix of both. You need to be able to roll your sleeves and get it done in order to have the respect of the people who think you've got the ability, you've got the knowledge, but you also have to be able to delegate it, so that it's not you always doing it. And I think the last and the most important thing is, do you get satisfaction when your team wins, or do you get satisfaction when you get an award? So are you after personal gratification, or are you after the achievements of your team? So I think that's how do you scale through others as opposed to do it all yourself. Because a great doer does it all themselves. If it takes them 20 hours to do it, they'll do it. But how do you reduce those 20 hours to 8 hours and get it done through others? Because that's how you scale. And are you there for personal glorification? Because if you're there for personal glorification, you can never be a good manager or a good leader. It's the same as a parent, right? The parent should get happiness when the child wins, not when you win. You know, there's a difference in terms of, you know, in terms of where you get pride from.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think those are some of the qualities. And how do you get those qualities? I think that's I don't think any organization's figured it out as such. I've had people in leadership position who are terrible, absolutely terrible, because they're not my role models that I've seen. But sometimes you've got to be at the right place at the right time in front of the right person to be recognized. And so sometimes it's very accidental that you get recognized and you get moved up. And that's what I kind of want to hopefully fix this. Let it not be accidental. Let all people who get into leadership position be intentional and not accidental.
Mm. So have you had mentors in your career?
Yes, I have. And I've had mentors for different things at different times. And they've been for a particular situation. And so when I was going through being bullied, I was being mentored I had a mentor who was like, how do I deal with this situation? What do I do? Where do I go? And then once that situation finished, my mentorship with that person finished, I now have a mentor specifically around how do I move into more leadership positions and so on and so forth. So I think it's been very intentional around what I've been mentored for as opposed to a generalist mentor.
Yeah, so you mentioned about being bullied at work, right? So do you think it is common for women of color to have these experiences in workplaces, or it's just you just happen to be in the wrong place?
I don't know whether it's common for women of color. I don't know. I don't have any data that I can say. I know that there are certain microaggressions that occur because of bias or unconscious bias. I know that a lot of Asian women don't tend to speak in meetings, either because they're not confident or they feel they don't have anything of value to add, including myself a lot of the times. And that is then taken as someone who doesn't have an opinion or doesn't have any ideas. Sometimes I think leaders in most of our corporate organizations need a course on cultural education, where certain ethnicities feel more comfortable giving ideas in a one-on-one situation as opposed to a group situation, and you need to be able to get the ideas of these people who might have really brilliant ideas to begin with in a different manner. And that cultural sensitivity training doesn't play a big part, at least not in Australia. I don't know about New Zealand. And it needs to, in order to ensure that we are inclusive. So I think both need to happen. We need to lift our organization's cultural sensitivity and awareness, and our leaders' cultural sensitivity and awareness, because we do operate in a multicultural scenario. We also need to lift our people and give them programs and identify the top talent within that, and see how we can promote that. I think both need to happen in order for change to occur. And that goes back to my thing about quota alone won't do it. The systemic changes need to take place.
Yeah. For systemic changes to take place, you also need more women at the table, right? Around the table to influence those decisions.
So this is where I go, yes and no. I have this idea. I don't know. Maybe I live in an idealistic world, but for women to have more place in the system or on the table, men need to allow for that.
Yeah.
Not women. Okay? So the change needs to occur with men. So for people of colored background that need to have more place, Anglo-Saxons need to change. So I think allies play a huge component. So if I look at a boardroom, and if the boardroom has 20 seats, like New York Stock Exchange and FTSE have a rule, they have a quota system. You cannot list your company in a board on the stock exchange unless you have 2 people of a minority ethnicity on your board. Great. But are those 2 people truly diverse, or are they often are they 4th generation Chinese who've been in the country for so long that they're as American as the next American, right? Because that's just filling the quota for the sake of a quota. It's not driving diversity. The reason why that quota exists is to drive diversity. So for me, it is how do you, if a boardroom was a piece of cake, was a cake, how do you, and it was already cut into 20 pieces, how do you make sure that you create 22 pieces out of it? It doesn't mean that. What I don't want to see is remove 2 pieces, take it away from the 2 Anglo-Saxons and give it to people of colored background or women or whatever. What I want to see happen is, how do you now take the same cake and recut it into 22 pieces? So how do you make others who are in the room to squeeze up a little bit more and make room for 2 more? Because as soon as you make it's either or, you're going to get resistance. But if you make it's me and you, then the resistance automatically diffuses. Because I'm not making you insignificant. I'm not coming in place of you. I'm not eliminating you. I am with you on this journey. And people are a lot more amenable to squeezing in as opposed to being thrown out of the train or the bus. So this isn't about me or you. It's about me and you, and how do we come to this together?
So what advice would you give to other migrant women of color who are considering a career in tech?
I think being gritty is really, really important. Migrant women of color, I think, have so many more challenges than non-migrants. Apart from having to reprove themselves in a situation, even today, your experience overseas probably doesn't count for as much as your experience in the country. You probably have to restart from scratch and go back. And until things change, that is a penalty you have to take. That is a cost of migrating, I would say. Just because you're a vice president in India in one of the companies doesn't mean you can come here and join as a vice president if you voluntarily migrated. I would always recommend, if you're looking to migrate, look to get a job from within wherever you are to one other country. So migrate through your own company as a transfer will be a lot more seamless than trying to start from scratch. But remember, every option has costs. Weigh up your costs and benefits and see whether it's worth it. I know when my father migrated, he migrated as a job, even though he was asked to come, it was not, it was a step down in his career. And he was willing to take that step down because he weighed up the benefits in terms of the educational opportunities for his children. And that hasn't changed anymore. And it's not for women, it's for men and women. I think the migration itself has costs, and you got to be mindful of those costs.
So how can migrant women of color contribute to shaping a more inclusive and diverse tech industry?
Don't shy away from the experiences you've had in your career outside of Australia or New Zealand. You bring a very unique perspective to how business is done because you've had the experience of having business having been done in another country. Use that as an advantage because you have different perspectives that can then add to the conversation. And if you're not comfortable sharing that in or confident sharing that in a room full of 20 people, pull the person aside and say, look, I'd love to have some 15 minutes separately. I have some ideas I'd like to share. I don't know whether they're valid in this discussion, but I'd love to talk to you one-on-one and share those ideas. What makes us rich is our knowledge, and our knowledge is received not just through the textbooks that we've studied, but the experiences we've had. So don't shy away from those because they can add a lot of value.
Great.
And the other thing I probably would say is that breathe and talk a little bit slower and capture your thoughts and pause. You don't have to go at a train that's going 200 miles an hour to keep up. Take your time. Get your confidence, because I know when you migrate, sometimes you feel like you need to get your ideas across really quickly and you might be speaking too fast. So it's okay. Just breathe and contain your thoughts and be very pause. It's not a race. You don't need to come first.
Now, looking back at your career for over 2 decades, is there anything that you had thought that, oh my God, I wish I did something different?
I keep telling my children this, I think, looking back, probably from my own mistakes. I probably should have done psychiatry. Shouldn't have listened to my parents. Although I've had a really good career in tech, it's I don't know. I feel like I would have been the type of person I am. I feel like I would have been much better a person in some sort of care, so whether it's psychiatry or medicine or something a little bit more empathetic than tech, because I care for humans a lot more than I always look at how we can be better humans than pure tech. So for me, even being in tech is how do we make our lives, the humans' life, easier and better. So looking back 20 years, I would say that I probably shouldn't have listened to my parents.
So what is one key message or takeaway you'd like our listeners to remember from your experience?
I think don't ever let anyone define your self-worth. I think that's really important. Through my journey, having been bullied in school and then at work, I think we live in a capitalist society, so we place a lot of worth on our performance, our bonus, whatever, our compensation, our promotion. That doesn't define you. It is only a part of what you are doing, and it is someone's opinion about you. It is not your self-worth. So do not ever give someone else the power to define your self-worth. That is up to you. I think you would be much harder. It would be much harder to bully you if you got your self-worth from who you think you are than if you got your self-worth from someone else defining what you are worth.
Yeah, that's very powerful. And it's a journey of self-exploration, I guess, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is, you've got to sometimes live through some experiences. There's another saying that I'm not sure there is, whether you know, there is a particular philosopher, was a particular philosopher in India called Chanakya. He had this saying that don't be too honest, because honesty is like the straight trees in a forest. They are the first to be cut down. So you learn when you need to be and I think that's been my weakness. I've been always very honest. So learn when you need to be truly honest and when you need to be diplomatic in order to ensure that you get the right message across. And so, for those who are sportsmen, and those who want some inspiration, and I've always been a fan of cricket, so I always say life is not a T20, and T20 is like a 20-over game, quick and fast and instant gratification. We're playing a test match, and there's a reason why test match is 2 innings. Our first innings may be bad, but we always have a second innings to make it up. So learn from your mistakes, and there is always a second innings in life. So just use those mistakes to learn from them.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time. I know you're a busy woman, and thanks for making time. Any final message?
Do what you can in your control to change, but don't waste your time on what you cannot change.
Yeah. I really enjoyed our conversation, Sneha, and thanks for being very honest and having a very open, vulnerable conversation with us. I'm sure there'll be people who will really listen and get some value out of it as well. Thank you.